do you, one, feel that was too much for them going to the ACC championship game with all of us talking about, yo, man, there were 3 starters missing from the front 7, and they were playing without Trevor Lawrence. Even as I say that DJ Uiagalelei is a more talented quarterback than Trevor Lawrence, he's not their leader. But you also have shown tremendous backbone with this defense. Like, yes, talk my ear off about Kyle Hamilton, but Jeremiah Owusu-Kamara has been outstanding, and to watch him come downhill is a thing. Like, I love watching the Woo Assassin go after people because he's got one gear, and as soon as he pulls the trigger, you're probably going to hate this, but I saw Kenneth Murray, just the way that he pull a string, and once that dude flares out, he's a dead man, right? What have you been surprised about, and if anything, what are you confident about going in against Alabama in this game?
Confident about.
Not pessimistic, confident.
Yeah. I think that because Mac Jones is not the threat to run the ball that Trevor Lawrence is and was in that ACC championship game, that the Notre Dame defense, you mentioned Owusu Koromoa and Kyle Hamilton, and those are the 2 dudes. Those are the guys on that Notre Dame defensive starting unit that are SEC title contender good. And play with that speed. They'll be able to pin their ears back, trust their eyes, and try to get after Alabama in a way that they just could not in the ACC championship game against Clemson, but they were able to in that early November game against Clemson. Now, that's going to invite some pretty troubling things on the back end where Notre Dame is just average at corner. And so it is hard for me to imagine Alabama not coming up, not hitting on big plays in much the same way Clemson did. And, you know, I hate the matchup for Notre Dame in this year. Now, here's an interesting thing, and I don't know the answer to it. I would pose this question to you. You've seen Ian Book's work this year, probably have a fair amount of respect for it, as do I. And you've seen Trevor Lawrence through 3 spectacular years at Clemson, you know, and then some of his most spectacular work, I think, happened in that ACC championship game, at least if you think Notre Dame is truly a top 10, 12 defense. If they had traded quarterbacks on that day, if Trevor Lawrence was the starting quarterback for Notre Dame and Ian Book was the starting quarterback for Clemson, how does that ball game play out? I don't think it's anything close to 34-10. I'm not saying Notre Dame wins, but I'm just saying this Notre Dame team, because of that blowout, is having the same old stuff thrown at them, that same old narrative that you're just not there with the big boys. And while I will absolutely admit that is the case with regard to Alabama, Clemson, or Ohio State, they have more talent than Notre Dame does. No doubt. Full stop. I do think Notre Dame is much closer than it was in 2012, where if Notre Dame had traded quarterbacks with Alabama on that day, there would have been no difference in the score. Everett Golson could throw it. Alabama might win by more. Notre Dame needs to get elite at that position. And what they're going about, the way they're trying to do this, heavy tight end sets, big offensive linemen, I think can actually be a thorn in the side of some of those guys at the very top. Not year in, year out, but every 3rd or 4th year when they have a special team. And assuming they can elevate the quarterback play to the, you know, you can get your own Trevor Lawrence. You can get your own Deshaun Watson. With somebody like that, I think Notre Dame, this particular Notre Dame team, would have the pieces in place to maybe take down an Alabama under the right situation. And certainly take down a Clemson or an Ohio State. To me, that's what's next for them. They're building this thing in the right way. Think Stanford when they had Andrew Luck and how they could be a thorn in the side for some of those high-octane offenses at either Oregon or USC. That's it. Shorten the game, ball control. These are things that Notre Dame is going to try to do against Alabama, and I'm just not sure they're going to have the quarterback who's good enough taking deep shots to actually make Alabama pay for it. And have this thing play out the way they want it to. But if you put, let's say, Andrew Luck back there, and granted, Andrew Luck doesn't come out of high school every year, but if you have that kind of quarterback back there for Notre Dame, I think they are a real threat to the Alabamas, Clemsons, and Ohio States. Without it, I just don't see how they match up. I just don't see it. The spread is 20 points. I'm the biggest Notre Dame fan, and if my mortgage was on the line, I would take Bama in this ball game. That's just how bad the matchup is at the moment, because they've got a bit of a pop gun offense that is good enough to handle anybody and everybody else. But when they go against those teams who recruit 4- and 5-star kids everywhere, they just don't have enough talent.
Well, to that end, right, I think that Ian Book is actually a better quarterback than it feels like you're making him out to be. I just think he's matched with the wrong system. I love this dude.
Yeah, you might be right.
And I think, I think that if you thought of Ian Book as having more Kyler Murray in him than, say, Landry Jones, it would make a lot more sense, because every time that dude is rolling to one side or the other, I trust him and I love what I see. But when you want to have him back there just going through his progressions, or even just reading one side of the field and then just dumping it off to the other, that's not what he does, especially with the personnel you have. The personnel that you described with Stanford fits, but he ain't that kind of guy. He needs to be able to move around. He needs you to have dudes out in all sorts of short routes, talking about drag concepts, mesh, things that allow you to take advantage of man-to-man, and things that allow for big open windows against coverage, whether it's cover 2 or cover 4. You need to be able to do that with him. And that way, it kind of sounds like Sam Ehlinger, right? But I did want to talk a little bit about Ohio State Clemson as well, but I wanted to put this on you. This 2017 Alabama team or 2017 Alabama recruiting class might be the best that has ever existed, and you get to face that. Right? Because, no, seriously, this is the way that I try to put this in perspective. Mac Jones and Tua are both probably going to end up first-round draft picks, and they were 2 quarterbacks in the same class. That never happens. Judy, Ruggs, Smith, never happens. Najee's at the top of that. And if anything, I was thinking Najee's never going to live up to this reputation, and yet here he is doing exactly that. So, Ohio State Clemson, Justin Fields versus Trevor Lawrence is the headline. But Amari Rodgers had a really great quote yesterday, just a little bit of fodder. He was asked, does he think Ohio State Clemson is a rivalry, with the two teams having met as often as they have the last 8 years? He said, not to us. I think they make it into a rivalry. And a lot of that stems from, Dabo Swinney and his ranking Ohio State number 11, saying as to why. Also saying, look, I've never lost to Ohio State. So, by all means, put them up there. What do you think? Do you think this game becomes a grudge match for Ohio State? Do you think it even matters? Does Clemson just outclass them?
Oh, I don't think Clemson outclasses them. And that actually puts a finer point on something I was getting at, but it kind of failed to mention. I really should compare Notre Dame and Ohio State, or Notre Dame to Ohio State and Clemson, with regard to how close they are, right, assuming they can get elite quarterback play. Alabama's on a different planet.
Sure.
And so under no circumstances do I think if Notre Dame and Alabama traded quarterbacks on Friday would it make any difference at all. So all that to say, Clemson and Ohio State, to me, are very close. Ohio State hasn't been able to play a full season. They haven't been tested by great teams. I think that if they had been, we would have seen a better version of that team. They are not what they were last year, but they could have been on more equal footing 1 year ago. And in fact, despite, Clemson coming out the victor in that ball game, I'm not sure they were the better team. So to me, look, I give Dabo, and I guess Amari as well, I give them props for being willing to say these things, because to me, they're saying it about somebody that's awfully close to an equal. Clemson's won the 2 national titles since Ohio State won their last one. So I understand. They've been so great in big games. Dabo's got some sort of secret sauce, because he sort of got the aw shucks thing. It's been hard. I've doubted him almost every step of the way until I just couldn't possibly anymore. There is no denying that Dabo Swinney is a great big game coach. And I give the guy credit for putting his money where his mouth is and having the guts to know. He knew weeks ago that they were probably going to beat Notre Dame, and there's no way they were going to get a rematch with Notre Dame in the playoffs. So he knew we're going to take on Ohio State. And instead of doing the thing you would do if you wanted to avoid bulletin board material and simply voting Ohio State as high as everybody else and saying great things about them, I think he gave us his version of the truth. He thinks that getting to the starting line 11 or 12 times in this COVID season, when the kids are being tested 3 times a week and they don't get to see their families and everything else we've talked about, is just so much more difficult than it is 6 or 7 games. People can disagree on that. People can disagree on whether or not Ohio State belongs in the playoff. But I give Dabo credit for standing on principle in a way that I don't think anybody else did. I don't think anybody else voted those guys, held them outside the top 10. So he took a stand against a team that he knows he's going to be facing. And to me, that takes some stones. So I take my hat off to him. I do think Ohio State absolutely will play with as much motivation as could possibly be summoned because of this. I mean, that's not a bear anybody else in the country probably has the cojones to poke. But I think because Clemson has had so much success in big games, they probably feel a little bit invincible. And probably because they have, the number 1 pick in next year's NFL draft. And for that reason, I will pick Clemson, but I will not be a bit surprised if Ohio State plays by far its best game of the year and finds a way to win this thing. Just wouldn't surprise me at all, because I think we simply haven't seen the real Ohio State yet this year. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe they have given us everything we need to know about them in the 6 or 7 games they've played so far. But I just have this hunch that this will be the best they've played, and Clemson's going to need to be really, really good to come out with the win.